Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 3 of quarter 3. We are talking about reclaiming feminine power today and moving from conditioning to conscious power. I have two wonderful panelists with me today, Courtney Buckley and Jill Taylor. And I'm really, really looking forward to this conversation, ladies. I hope you're both doing well today.
We are, or I am. Jill, I can't speak for you.
No, it's great to be here. It's great to be here.
All right, so let me do some introductions. Jill Taylor is a mother, musician, and a spirit-led guide, known in her community as the Music Mum. She teaches piano, nurtures creativity in children and adults through music-centered learning. And alongside her music education, Jill leads the Somatic Sanctuary, a community space focused on nervous system healing, embodied awareness, and a deep spiritual connection rooted in Christ consciousness. As the mother of 4 neurodivergent children, her work is deeply shaped by family life and generational healing, bringing creativity, embodiment, and faith in a way that helps people rediscover the voice that has always been within them. Thanks, Jill, for being with us. And then we have Courtney Buckley, who is a guide, guiding neurodivergent and highly sensitive souls to safety, clarity, and authentic living. Welcome, Court. Thank you for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. So today's episode is my last episode in the public education panel series on the Feminine Rising quarter topics. And I wanted to close this quarter with a real move towards what feminine power looks like and what reclaiming feminine power looks like. It's a conversation that feels deeply important because it speaks to something that so many women are going through and navigating beneath the surface of their everyday lives. And it's coming to the fore, how much women have been conditioned and how much our identity has been shaped by gender roles or, outdated obligations. And so I really want to talk about how we inherit expectations before we inherit our identity and how we learn to sort of perform. And I really I'm really excited to have this conversation with you guys and to get your opinions on what you think is happening out there in terms of feminine conditioning and how we can move forward to reclaiming our power as women. So let's start with internalized conditioning and the good woman archetype. And what we are experiencing as women, the pressures to perform in a certain way and to come across as in terms of like how the patriarchy has shaped the idea of women. So let's talk about that. Well, how do you guys see the good woman archetype and the conditioning that's going on for women? Jill, would you like to start?
So my experience in this is very much coming from heavy conservative religious experience. I grew up in a cult here in the United States. I left it back in 2020, so I've only been on a couple years, had all 4 of my babies in it. And from my perspective, I think that for a long time, I thought this was just an issue within the church, and now that I am so much outside of the church, I see it from a whole different perspective now. But in my opinion, and I ended up going there last week as well, when I was reading what we were going to talk about today, the first thing that popped into my head was Proverbs chapter 31. In the Bible, it's considered the chapter of the perfect woman, the woman that we aspire to be. Reading it can be very empowering. It's actually a very feminist chapter in the Old Testament, but looking at how far back that particular text goes, and in the way that I was raised, this good girl archetype, I mean, you read it and it's this woman that's just like the perfect Susie homemaker, and she makes sure her family is safe and taken care of and all these things, but the way that it is taught is very much submissive, and this is where the woman's place is. Proverbs is the only book of the Bible where they reference wisdom as a she over and over and over, but the rest of the Bible is very patriarchal. Even Proverbs is. So when you are taught that context and it's all of the power is taken out of that entirely. The beginning of that chapter, it starts with how the mother is this prophetic woman and prophesies this stuff to her son. She's never named. And then you're given this list, 31 verses of all of these things that the woman's supposed to do in the home, or that make her a virtuous woman. And for me, I remember seeing all of the attributes that I had that I felt fit outside of that parameter. Like I was loud. I had questions. I wanted to do this or I wanted to do that. Or I was taught to lead. I was the oldest daughter in a pastor's home. Like I didn't have a choice but to lead. But that warped my view of femininity in my head and what womanhood was actually supposed to look like, because then I walked into my early 20s with 4 babies in tow by the time I'm 22, because that was my role, was have babies and run the house. And I was a very strong leader, but at that point I'm praying God would take it away because I thought it was making me sinful or more shameful, or I wasn't woman enough. What I didn't recognize was that was just my masculine side. I was way energetically out of balance. But from my perspective, the influence that the church specifically has had here in the United States and honestly in other countries, we've pushed missionaries and pushing the gospel out for generations. That's been the protocol here. But when the premise is in the woman's circle, you stay home, you sit down, you don't get a name in the book, you don't get to stand up and say anything unless it's to amen the preacher. Stepping outside of that and finding actual spiritual journeys for myself outside of the church, women ran the world for a very long time. That's why the Bible's all run by men. Like, it's why they tried taking control of it. But also, the influence is so heavy. It doesn't matter if you're in church or not. It's so ingrained here generations back that you can be a complete atheist and still be married to someone that's a misogynist without even realizing it, because it's so ingrained in their psyche and it just happens to come out in conversation, you know? Learning a healthier perspective is obviously where I land now, and I'm able to go back to the Bible from a healed perspective for myself, but there's millions of women that can't. There are millions of women that book has damaged, and it's not just the states. It affects the cultures, and it's a heavy influence. From my perspective, it's one of the biggest influences we've got, even before it was pieced together as the Bible, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. That's such an amazing reflection that you bring to us, and your experience from within the religious community is so valuable for those of our listeners who may be affected, from a religious point of view, or resonate through a religious point of view. And I really love that you're making God and the Bible approachable for women who may have a different viewpoint, or who may be going through the struggle of not necessarily identifying with the perfect woman of Proverbs 31. That's a very important viewpoint for us to add to this conversation, because I feel like there is a big separation and split between the spiritual world, who have kind of rejected religion, and then the religious who kind of reject the spiritual world. And by the spiritual world, I mean the sort of alternative spiritual world, let's say. So I think it is important that there is a space in between where we can still work together and share our messages together. Yeah. And what you spoke about, those perfect archetypes of what women should be, I think it doesn't matter what your religion is. I think that crosses many religions, the idea of the perfect wife, the good mother, the accommodating one, not too emotional, and heaven forbid you raise your voice or lose your temper, because then you become hysterical. All of these kinds of labels that have been placed on us. Yeah. And then also just now I'd like to talk about the internalized misogyny as well, but that came up in your discussion there, Jill, about how, it's been, women aren't given the name. They're not even given the accreditation for a lot of the wisdom that came through in the prophecy and all of that sort of thing. So Courtney, let's hear your take. How are you experiencing conditioning for women, and how is it coming through, in terms of womanhood for you?
Well, I like what Jill said, and how she referenced that this kind of conditioning has been passed down through generations, and we can get into epigenetics and all the things, how it's literally been passed down through our DNA, but specifically through conditioning. I want to kind of preface, when I hear that phrase of reclaiming the feminine, I don't hear it as like becoming something new or someone new, right? I hear it as a remembering, returning to parts of ourselves that may have been buried beneath the conditioning, performance, the productivity, survival, all of those things, the expectations that the men have for us, and well, the systems in general. And for me personally, this hasn't been about becoming more feminine in that stereotypical sense. It's been more about becoming honest and more connected and more self-trusting. That's what's really been coming to the forefront for me, even just recently. I think many of us grow up absorbing messages, what makes us lovable, the value, our value in this world, or what even how we have to specifically act to be acceptable in society. That good woman archetype often teaches us to be agreeable, accommodating, self-sacrificing, learning to manage our emotions in a very what they would call a healthy way, when in fact it's really not. Always being grateful and easy to love. And conditioning isn't always it's not always obvious. Sometimes it comes through those family systems, through culture, relationships, or survival even. Being it's like they like tell us to don't be too emotional, don't be too loud, don't take up too, like, being, especially me being neurodivergent, I hear these phrases a lot growing up. Don't take up too much space, don't question too loudly, you have to
Yeah.
act this way in order to be accepted or to not disappoint anyone, be helpful, be needed. Like, and why that one was a big one too, like, be needed. Why do I need to be needed? Like, I don't that's a whole nother conversation, I believe. But I feel like we come to this place where we are the ones that always have to hold everything together. And many women become like incredibly skilled in this, at learning how to read a room without words being even spoken, anticipating needs of others and managing other people's comfort. And while those things all have their place, I think it can get to a place where it's extremely exhausting and not really it's coming from more of a masculine type of energy, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
I think it's helped us to belong and to stay safe. But it also disconnects us from ourselves along the way. I think many of us don't realize how conditioned we really are until we begin asking those questions like, do I actually want this? Or was I taught to want this? Am I being authentic or am I being acceptable? I think that's really the kind of the deeper questions that we have to ask.
Yes. So let's ask them, because exactly what you said there, exactly at the end, what you said there is the internalized misogyny, right? We don't even know that we're conditioned, and we experience this, which is one of the great sadnesses that I experience, on behalf of the feminine collective, is the way that women are pitted against each other, and create a kind of competitive energy. And obviously, those of us in conscious spaces have worked on healing the internalized misogyny within us, because I think everybody has it. They just have to be honest that they have it, and like factoring in the male gaze and things like that. And then I've just, in my healing journey, been so blessed to have such amazing older women who have shared their wisdom with me, not only to ignite my own understanding of feminism, but also to realize the power of the connection that can happen between women that are genuine, authentic, and living their truth, if you want to use those terms, or just not afraid to take up space, just being in their wholeness. And it taught me that there was so much more to myself as a woman, and there was so much more to what I could do in the world than I had been previously been taught to or conditioned to believe. So let's ask that question. And Courtney, since you were on a roll there, why don't you tell us how you've experienced, the conditioning that we're not even aware of? How does that look for you?
Well, there's been, gosh, my whole life, like my whole life has been surrounded by masking, has been surrounded by, doing things that people, society, church, family, all the things, school, has taught me, don't question too loudly. Don't you need to act this way in order to be accepted, all those things. And when I really got to a place in my healing journey that I could finally pause long enough to ask myself and be still long enough to hear what my true self really what place it was moving from, a whole new version. I remember looking when I was able to drop those masks, looking in the mirror and meeting this woman for the first time. Like, who is this person and what does she really want? What does she really want? And while it was very empowering, it was also very sad because I had never met this version of me, and having to really sit of what I really wanted was a whole new ball game. Like I didn't know, because I've always been taught, to form, like to take on other people's beliefs. I never formed my own beliefs. That was never really strongly modeled for me. Never given me the chance to have my own voice. I was always taught to question that, question like where doubt creeps in, or am I actually, is this really who I am, or was I taught to be this way? I think when it comes down to, when I was able to answer those questions, that's when I was able to say, you know what, I'm that person that is a safe space that can hold other people's truths without judgment, without, feeding into their chaos, if you will, because we all have it. I feel like I'm that place that can be that placeholder and make them feel, help them restore that safety within them. When I was able to restore the safety, internal safety with myself, oh my gosh, I've learned how to start healing as a whole instead of just pieces of me. And now I can do that for others. And that's what really came out of this whole awakening journey of truly knowing who my authentic self is, and not grabbing the pieces that other people had given to me like they were mine to carry. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I just want to touch on what you said, that it's sad, the way that you looked in the mirror and said, who is this person and what does she want, and how I've never asked those questions before. It really is a bittersweet awakening, I think, when you realize, and I've actually been going through that recently, where you kind of have to ask this question, like, who am I in the world if I'm not the pretty girl, or if I'm not the successful girl, or if I'm not the good wife or the good mom, who else am I? What else am I? And the sadness of never actually being able to, first of all, being aware that you should be asking those questions. Secondly, that you don't have the answers necessarily straight away, and that it's not encouraged. It does bring a deep grief and sadness to realize that you have been living someone else's life, or not necessarily living someone else's life, but not necessarily being completely authentic from the start. And I think that's something that comes up. And then I just wanted to hop on something else that you said, which is, there's so much more to us, and having to create that safety, in being okay with just being a full expressive human. It's not necessarily always about gender, but just like, I am a human. Okay, I'm not less than you because I have feelings or thoughts, or and have the way women are sort of expected to keep themselves small. So, for example, your level of intelligence, or your level of questioning, your level of agency in discussions, where you're literally just always keeping yourself small because you don't want to rock the boat. That's been a big one for me as I've been trying to advance in my career spaces, and with the work that we're doing at Critical Mass, and in the healing circles and the spiritual circles. It's a big one, to own
I've recently
own
went through
strength.
something very similar, which I didn't even realize was still a thing. I thought I had healed part, I know everything's like an onion and you peel back layers, so it's not all healed at once, but I thought I had done the majority of the work around my abandonment and rejection wounds. And come to find out, all these things started raising awareness in me that I hadn't. And me asking, my spiritual side, asking, okay, what is it that I need to do in order to move forward and to open up these gifts, like becoming a Reiki master, that really amplified my gifts and my abilities, right? But I'm like, okay, how can we further this? How can we dive deeper into it? And it was that space of, I needed to go further into the healing of the abandonment and the rejection, but it didn't just was there. It started with like, it was like a blind spot for me. Like I wasn't able to fully see it because it was so close. It was so close to me. And I'd never asked the right questions. I was never asking those deep questions. And when I did a meditation one evening, and I gave my higher self that permission to really kind of tell me what it is that I needed to focus on. The first word that came to me was religion, was religion. And I don't mean to discredit God. I believe in God, but in a very different way than most people think of God and how I was raised in that religious upbringing, like I'm not discrediting that. I just have formed my own beliefs around it. And it was more of, do I speak on this and do I want it to fully become visible in the world of speaking my truth, whether that be on religion, whether that be on my spiritual gifts and abilities, whatever it may be. Is it still safe to do that and still be accepted and loved by certain family members? And that was the core of it. And I'm like, whoa, I've never gone to that depth and been able to ask myself that sort of a question, because we've been conditioned to not think in that way. They want you to stay agreeable. They want you to stay, pleasing and doing all the good things so that it doesn't bring up discomfort in their world.
Yeah, and I'm sure Jill can weigh in on this as well in her experience.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm gonna just backtrack a little bit for myself. So I did not get a formal autism diagnosis until probably a year ago. Not a little longer than a year, maybe a year and a half. Because of the extensiveness of the complexity of my trauma, and because of the fact that I was raised on platforms and just in front of people the entire time, I learned to mask very, very, very well. I left the church in 2020, had no idea my ADHD showed up in a way that had never, because my autism, honestly, is probably what saved me in the church. I love the rules. I love the rituals. I love the consistency. I still am reading out of my King James Bible. I have finally bought different versions and I've branched out, but like that is how much that side of me latched. And without having that awareness about myself, especially, it left me in my later 20s struggling in ways that I could not comprehend. Like at that point, I had been in so much mental health therapy that I'm like, I don't understand why I'm still having a problem. I have no idea. And neither could my therapist, because that is how well I masked. She never even pegged autism because I was so high. I mean, I am high functioning, but my daughter going through her diagnoses and getting stuff sorted, my oldest, she's 11, and she's both ADHD and autistic as well. But going through her diagnosis is what helped me discover mine. And up until that point, I had done so much work up here to understand why I was the way I was. Like my hyperfixation is the body. I love to learn. Like my last year of school was 10th grade. Like I did not have formal schooling in any kind of capacity, but I've spent the last decades of my life looking for answers because nothing ever made sense. But when it came to me, I had left the church. At that point, I didn't care if anybody didn't like what I was doing. I mean, I was, whoa, it was a mess, but like I was figuring it out. But when I found that autism piece specifically, that one broke me. That one broke me in a way because I did not realize how much I was still masking, how much of that was not still me. It was just the trauma coming out, and it took years of misdiagnoses and hospitalizations for us to get to this point. But even now, like Courtney, you were talking about how religion came up. And first of all, I just want to say the fact that that is the thing that came up for you when you thought that it was all gone. For me, that does not surprise me, because from my perspective, when you are raised in any type of semi-controlling religion, which is most religions here in the United States, I'm sorry, but they are, just going to call it for what it is, it warps your spirituality. It warps it in a way that you don't learn to trust yourself. You don't know how to listen to that internal voice. And for me, at least, I didn't care what the rest of the world thought, but I was trying to do something different, and my body was like, what the hell are you doing? I wasn't afraid of the world not liking me. My body didn't like me. Like, quite literally. Because it was so opposing of everything that I had been ingrained and trained to think a woman was supposed to do. in that time frame, I've utilized psychedelics in my healing journey a couple different times, and I'd gone on a retreat, and this retreat, it was such a spiritual experience when I dosed in that week, and there was a lot of breath work and other stuff, but I had met what I call my big, right? We've been talking about us women being told to shrink and stay small. I remember God praying for that God would just take my voice and make me small and meek. But about 2 years ago, I met my big. I met her head on. I realized why I was put here, the whole 9 yards. And
Huh?
authenticity became survival. And that moment, when I realized that point, because I was in so much physical discomfort, all of the pieces of the puzzle kind of clicked in my head. And I was like, okay, so even if I can't make sense of this junk, this is why I had to go through the junk, is to continue on with this big of a story on the side. But with that came, I had to learn how to be not afraid of myself. I had to, and I still am.
Mm-hmm.
There are
Get out.
sides of myself, questions that I don't know how to ask myself just yet. Now they probably aren't around religion for me because I've tore that one up, but also it may still be. I mean, I'm only 31. You were talking about a student triggering you before or like kind of setting you off with that ball before we started the recording. Um, my 11-year-old daughter charged at me this week because she's trying to assert her independence and do all these things, and she's very emotional, and I'm struggling to help her in a lot of ways. We didn't know until she was older. She was raised in a lot of the same stuff early on. But in that moment, I have the awareness to stop. I have these things, but trying to combat the actual meat suit that's like, what the hell is this? Like the protective mechanism that comes out, I'm still really having to learn to befriend that protective side of me and not look at her like she is this monster, because she's not. She just doesn't know how to exist in this world and feel safe at the same time, because it is so different. And that's why, that's what the somatic sanctuary was born out of, was a lot of nervous system work for me, because I realized normal formats weren't working for me. I couldn't go to yoga classes or even Reiki very often because there was too much deconstruction up here that still needed to happen.
Yeah.
And so I've been taking little pieces from different sects, and my theology is so far out there. Like, I'm with you, Courtney. Like, I love God in a very, very different kind of way. Different kind of way. But it took so much for me in my body to be able to be like, no, I'm going to be my big. I'm going to be authentic. I don't care if you don't like me or not. But at first it wasn't, I don't care. It was literally,
like that.
It was not an option. Like, I couldn't pull the masks back out even if I wanted to. Like they were gone. They were shattered. And it was terrifying. It was one of the hardest seasons of my life. And I thought I'd already hit rock bottom a couple times at that point, but that autism piece was such a big factor for me. And so when you're missing that part, or any part that you just don't recognize, and all of a sudden you see it, especially if that's where my big sits, is in my autism. It's why I'm so hyper fixated on the Bible. It's why I can't stop studying this stuff. But if I don't allow that part of me to continue and feel safe here, I can't do that part,
Yeah.
But it's been a lot to retrain her, very, very, because it runs so deep. I will find I'm even when my children's father is not like, obviously this one's involved, but my 4 kids, their dad is not in the picture. He hasn't been in almost a year. He's just dipped completely out of the kids' lives. But what that has placed on me as a woman, it's insane the amount of questions that have brought up for me, because I'm like, if I were a dude, I wouldn't think twice about it. If I were a man, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. And in a lot of ways, it's a saving grace. It's what makes me such a good mother. It's why I will continually show up. But even now that I have a healthy partner involved and in the kids' lives, the kids love him, I find myself questioning myself, or like, oh, I need to go check with Justin about this, or no, I don't. And when I was by myself, I had no problem not doing that. And it's not that I don't want to have communication with my partner. It's this automatic need of approval, because and I don't usually follow that, but it's still very annoying to see it pop up consistently a lot, and be like, why are you still here?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is so important, and I think women have learned to mask in so many ways. Obviously, there's a significant definition of masking in the neurodivergent world and through autism. But I think women are taught to mask our emotions and our experiences. The show must go on, and that kind of thing, put on the good smile, fix your mascara. No one's allowed to know that you've been crying, that kind of thing. And it's just, it's such an insane premise when you say, like, men don't even think about that, and women are expected to shoulder a lot of responsibility and a lot of these kinds of things. And I'm really proud to hear so many women going through these experiences. And like you said, the nervous system gets so disturbed when I'm feeling something, but I'm conditioned to think that that's a bad feeling or a wrong feeling or a non-acceptable feeling. It's such a terrible thing to think that you're not acceptable for just being who you are. So we have this disconnect to our bodies and to the way we show up in the world and what makes us worthy, and all of this kind of stuff is all messed up for us simply because we were born as feminine, and or for those of us who identify as female. And I think it's such a sadness because there is such a greatness to the female gender and to the female experience. And I think that's what we're trying to work towards, is to how valuable it is and how deep it is. But Courtney, I saw you nodding. You were very excited to jump in on what Jill was saying there.
Yeah, yeah, I was. I was trying so hard to stay quiet. I think it was the thing that just kept coming back to me is it's like we've been taught to, and this is what really hit home for me. And the phrase that I kept coming back to is, stay spiritual, but only enough to stay connected, right? It wasn't be spiritual and let all your authenticity out. It was just do it just enough to where you can stay connected. And that's what is needing to be released, that because that conditioning is so deep. I mean, so deep that we don't even realize just how much of a core wound that it really is, and a lot of people don't even look at it. And if they haven't even gone on a healing or a spiritual journey, they may not even see it as a wound. It's just how they were brought up. It's just how they've been taught to live and show up in the world. And if you've never been given that voice to really advocate for yourself in that manner, I mean, how do you really know any different, And so I'm extremely grateful that, I was able to have something took place in my life that opened that door to go on a healing and spiritual journey. I wasn't even planning on going on the spiritual journey. It was just that I needed to do a lot of healing. I was in a lot of grief, and it opened that door to, I needed to heal. I was a single mom, I had to function, but with that healing came the spiritual side. So anyways, that's a whole nother conversation. Go ahead.
No, I think what you're saying is so valid. So I really do think, based on what you're saying, is that so many women don't even realize how much of their personality has actually been shaped or adapted until they start actually questioning why they feel depressed or why they feel exhausted, resentful, invisible, or disconnected from themselves. Like you go through, you've both described having incredibly traumatic experiences, and not necessarily just from a religious standpoint, but from yourself. Like there is something, Jill calls it her big, but there is something in you that asks and that questions, and it can sometimes be, what about me? Or who am I? And I think that's where we disconnect from our feminine, from our power, from our voice, from our authenticity. So I'd like to talk about that, because we've spent so many years performing our roles dutifully and well behaved and truthfully. And so I really want to talk about the impact of being disconnected from what it means to be women, and specifically our power, and specifically the wild aspect of us, and the part that isn't actually submissive, the part that actually wants to talk and to speak and to lead, as you mentioned. So Courtney, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you feel the disconnect to the feminine, or how not living your authentic self has affected you?
Sure. Well, disconnection from yourself is not always dramatic. Sometimes it looks like functioning, just simply functioning. Sometimes it looks like overperforming or overgiving, overextending yourself, overachieving. Us women are very good at holding everything together while we're quietly abandoning our own needs. It can look like burnout, people pleasing, hyper independence. I am very guilty of that. When my parents used to use that one as a badge of honor, like my daughter will fall on her face before she'll ever ask for help, and realize, becoming aware that was a trauma response, that was the conditioning in me. That was a whole new, I'm like, wow, that's not really something to brag about. But it can also show up as something like, emotional exhaustion, so many other things. I mean, the list can go on. And for many of us, that body begins speaking long before the mind ever catches up. We have to take that into account, that sometimes our body and our mind take a long time. Not, I don't want to say a long time, but it takes time to catch up with what we're actually moving through. Me, like exhaustion, anxiety, irritability, tension, all of those things are information in our body, that we can take cues from, and a lot of us learn to ignore them or override them. And it's not that our body is betraying us of sorts, but it's because it may be communicating something that we've been, again, taught to override. So I think that I've seen this in my own healing journey, and in people that I support. The body often carries wisdom long before we consciously understand what's happening. And I think that disconnect has been there so long that we don't even recognize that it is us disconnected from ourselves. We've been so tied to our outside and external world that we never take the time to go internal inside and figure out what actually is taking place, what's happening.
Absolutely. What you say is so valid. And I think that's where, for me personally, and so many people, the value of spiritual practice, whatever your spiritual or religious practice may be, these spaces where you can actually commune with yourself and the deeper parts of yourself, like you said before, someone said the parts that we've rejected. And with women, I think we go through that schism of the psyche, where there's so much that is wrong or bad or not allowed, that we have a lot of shadow work to do. And it's particularly distressing for women because we have so much receptive energy, so much natural unconscious feminine holding. We do the depth work, and we own. The medicine woman owns the shadow. She's not the only one, obviously, but the masculine, if you stereotypically think about the archetype, is the one that goes out into the world. It's the more active, it's the more forceful, it's the more in the light, in the being the known, it's obvious. Whereas the feminine aspect is less so. So for that to be suppressed or denied, I really do think it creates a serious problem and that's why women get so angry, and that's where the rage comes from, and also, like you said, the grief of being disconnected from oneself. And I just wanted to say, all those things you pointed out in the beginning, I can feel like our viewers are going to be nodding, yes, functioning, high, overachieving, all those things you said. I think so many women relate to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I want to give Jill a chance to weigh in also. What do you feel about the idea of disconnecting? I mean, you did speak a little bit about it earlier with your nervous system work and your somatic sanctuary, but how do you feel the disconnect from the feminine shows up?
So I really loved Courtney's approach. It was especially her, like you said, Leon, like naming those things that people are going to identify very quickly. Absolutely. For me, that overfunctioning looked like mania, like a lot of mania. And for a while, I thought it was a good thing. I figured out how to utilize it, but I want to kind of take a slightly different angle. And Liana, you touched on this a little bit. For me, I think the biggest impact that part of my life had, that disconnect from my body, caused such a big disconnect between me and spirit. And I think that's that way for everybody across the board, male or female. But talking about the feminine side specifically, when you are taught that your body is shameful, I mean, honestly, I was touching on this earlier, Courtney, when I mentioned that I wasn't surprised that the religion thread is what came up, and that you were like, what the hell is this doing here? We are, like, the Bible even talks about it. Jesus says our body is the temple, right? If you go into a lot of woo-woo or Eastern medicine, a lot of things that have helped me in my somatic side, they not worship, but they work around the body like it is the temple, because it's an antenna, like the spine, the whole 9 yards. There's so many different layers to this, and I'm not going to go into all of them. Very, very fascinating. But when you think about that from, let's just say, I will just use me and my sisters, like growing up in the way that we did, it caused such a disconnect from the body that the only way that spirit could get anything through to me was with a whole lot of emotional dysregulation and life circumstances that were going crazy, which is absolutely insane to think about, because I was in church over 5 times a week. We were recording CDs. I was ministering to people. We were doing studies. Like, I was so in it that you would have thought we were going to we were all gonna own heaven. It was gonna be great, you know. But like that was so not a reality. Like, and it kept all accountability off of ourselves in the way that we believe that theology. But further than that, even once I started teaching my body, or like trying to rewire my brain and like connect it all a little bit more, the thing for me that has changed most exponentially, and I'm going to go out and say that my mom and I just had this conversation quite literally yesterday, and I think even in her own healing journey, she's still in a Baptist church, you know, but even in her healing journey, she is finding that the more she listens to her body and connects to her body and goes to therapy, the deeper her relationship with Jesus actually gets. The stronger her connection gets to the source. But when you think about that as a female, or like I know so many women that don't think it's bad enough, or they just think it's part of their upbringing, and they don't recognize the trauma or the negative impact that that line of thinking or that line of verbiage has had over generations or just decades of them listening to it. But then they come out of it and they sit there and don't know how to deal with their anger. They think their anger is sinful, but it's not. They just don't know how to feel safe with it because they've never been taught to feel safe with it. But thinking about that outside of disconnecting from the body, if you're disconnected from your body, I don't care what religion you are, you will not be able to connect to source. It does not matter your philosophy. It doesn't matter if you're a spiritualist. Like, I know atheists that are very healthy, that have great relationships with a higher power for themselves, and they've got a great relationship with their bodies. You don't have to believe in a God, but like, if you cannot be connected to your meat suit, you cannot connect to source in a way that is fully at the capacity that we are meant to. And I won't say it's not possible, because like, God gave me lots of downloads, but it also came with a lot of emotional ups and downs and things that were very not healthy for my body at the time. I couldn't handle it. The more I've healed, the more I have given a name to that voice and safety to that voice coming out, and letting her know that she can be angry and it can be messy, and I'm not justifying my actions. I can apologize for it later. I am just learning, you know, just like every other human. But when you connect to that raw power, that wildness that women especially do carry, the whole book has women that have changed the world. I'm just saying, like, their names are in there, but they're labeled as crazy, they're labeled as prostitutes, they're labeled as all of these things, and they are Jesus' bloodline. So like, I'm gonna argue it till the day I die. I will be the crazy person. I will be that, because for me, you don't have to. I'm not going to look at Proverbs 31. And even if you actually read Proverbs 31, that is a woman fully balanced in her masculine and feminine energy. She is able to take charge, take control. She is well-rounded, but that's not the way that it's taught. So for me, I think that that is one of the biggest impacts on being disconnected from your body, because forget convincing a bunch of people to read the Bible the wrong way. What happens when you have millions of women across the globe that are disconnected from their bodies and cannot connect to their source in their own capacity because their religion has taught them XYZ, or it's that ingrained? Like, that's a mega issue, you know, like, because it
is a mega issue.
And that disconnect, like, we have to learn to find safe, even men, they have to learn to find safety within their feminine sides to be able to connect fully to source. My dad is the most passionate pastor I have ever met. He has a very big struggle with his mental health. His story is very sad, if I'm honest. It's what fuels me moving forward. But it's not because he didn't want to believe the Bible. He just was so in the masculine, and the feminine was taught to be so bad that he could not be in his emotions that it warped everything that came out of his mouth. And there's a million other pastors that are like that, but it's not because they're necessarily wrong across the board on the moral of what they're trying to get across. It's that you can't filter the book through love when you won't love yourself fully, whether you're male or female. And I tend to go back to the Bible, but it's more about the connection to source, or however you connect, you know. You can't connect to that if you're not connected to your body. You just can't.
100%.
Well, I think there's a huge disconnect with the disconnect between spirituality and religion heavily correlates with the disconnect between the body and self, you know. Like, I think there's a huge correlation there, just because that's where a lot of the conditioning has come from, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So I mean, I won't just say that verbatim for other people that have other spiritual walks, but from my personal belief, if you have to deconstruct from any type of religion, Christianity or something else, you are left with such a big extreme that it does disconnect you from your body, you know. And those of us who claim spirituality have been able to find that walk, but it's why I wasn't surprised that Leonie started talking about things that were spiritually minded, because it is so important to the female body, especially, you know, that connection. So yeah.
It's true. What both of you are saying is so important. I think real healing is about embodying spirituality. It's not just about being in the mental or the emotional or the theory of what it is to heal or to do this kind of work. You actually have to embody it. And, it is something that I do want to talk about in another series sometime, is how do we walk this talk. But just to go back to what you said, I think religion has a huge place in this process, but I think that religion was also, um, can't take the full blame or the full accountability for what's happened to women. I think society and the patriarchy also, and that any woman who is deconstructing from the conditioned vision of what she should look like, because you mentioned shame. I think any woman who's trying to take back her body or ownership of what she should look like, or how she should feel, or how she should behave, or what she should do with her life, I think also goes through a similar experience. But I do think it's very dramatic when you're trying to shift out of religious conditioning. But I think the female experiences this on mass, and especially those of us who are really looking at what it. Because, for example, sexuality is so shamed. We're talking about male, female, and this and that. Our sexual orientation is so shamed, but the body type is a specific sort of body type, and it's really scary what's happening in Hollywood these days with the severe weight loss and the new archetype of what an attractive woman looks like. I mean, we're seeing bones and skeletal and starving yourself, and then there's the opposite, where there's this huge over sexualization and this overt sexualization of women, and it's such a diminishing point of view, because I'm all for accepting sensuality and sexuality and expressing it in the way that makes you comfortable. But I feel there are so many women that may be forced into expressing themselves overly sexually, or in a sexual manner, because they believe that's all they have to offer. We've become diminished to being objectified through our bodies, or through our sexual opportunity, I suppose, or what we offer. And then, or otherwise, we can look at it through different things, through your looks, or through your ability to be a good wife or a good mother, or, your social status, all of these things. And it's that women become shamed for if you don't have, or you don't tick those kinds of boxes. And I think the disconnect when women start, especially if they've been living their life in that mode, when you start waking up now, you've got the kids, you've had the perfect wedding, you've got the photos on the wall, and now there's this hole or this emptiness and this, like you're saying, anxiety or this disconnect. It's like, but I did all the things that I was supposed to do, right? I'm supposed to be happy. Where's the happy? And a lot of them are breaking out of that mold now, saying, well, I need more. And that's where the spiritual connection, or the gap, the missing spiritual connection comes from. Is like, well, what else is there? What about me nourishes me? What about me is more than just all of these things? So what you're saying is so powerful, both of you, and I just wanted to add that. Sorry, off my soapbox now.
No, you're fine. I think that you hit many important points there. The one that stood out to me is that you said that, a lot of women have become over sexualized. And I think a lot of us have taught that if we were raised in a house where we had to earn our love in a way that, like our love was transactional or conditional, we learned to think that our sexual behavior or how we dress or all that's going to equate or equal love, and when you realize that that's not what that means, you have to come back and ask those deeper questions. Again, it's all about asking those right questions, or deeper questions that will lead to the better answer or better questions, that it was never about that all along. It was about, harnessing that self-love and all that. When you turn inwards, the answers are always there. Even the Bible will point you that way. The answers are always within. And when you come back to a place of self-trust, self-love, self-worth, all these things, that's when you're going to be able to hold that capacity and give to the masses, So I think it's really important to really distinguish between those two things, or all of those things. And that's how you begin to move forward in that.
Yeah, like redefining womanhood for yourself. There's
Yeah.
no right way to do it, but I think it's important that as women we start collectively taking it back. That's kind of where I wanted to go with this conversation is what does it look like to take the definition of women and women in conscious power, women, how does it look, and how can we continue to embody it without it being a threatening thing to, like you said, families, our existing circles, those kinds of things. um, Maybe we'll move on to that now. You've both spoken about the fear of being shamed or rejected or ousted by your family circles or close circles as a result of shifting your beliefs or shifting yourselves into a less desirable or socially acceptable form. And I think that's something, I was raised a-religious, but my father and mother were both raised very religious, and they had their traumatic experiences in different religious institutions. And so they chose to raise me independent of that I could make my own choice where it came to religion. So I didn't have to deconstruct it specifically. My parents already did that work for me. But it is a very difficult thing to be different and to not believe what the masses believes, and it leads to masking, it leads to hiding your identity, it leads to being seen as weird or strange or otherwise. And now that I'm old and I don't care, I'm totally accepting of being weird. It's what makes me happy. But I think it's something that we need to talk about as well, because it is, how can we help women, in your minds, both of you, how can we help women to take this journey, not necessarily to tell them what to do, but how to feel more comfortable, and what are the benefits of connecting with yourself and with your feminine in whichever way that you define it? How would you advise them to steps or thoughts that to embrace their feminine? Jill, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here. So, the first thing I'm going to say, this was coming through so strongly while you were talking, Leonie, and I am going to say this with so much love for any woman that watches this. Finding acceptance and making people uncomfortable is going to be the best thing you can do for yourself. Because if you are leading any life that you have to break free of in any capacity, you getting yourself uncomfortable to heal is going to make every single person around you very uncomfortable. And that right there is where the fear sits. That one place. And the second you recognize that it is not your job to control anyone else's feelings, that is the rest of the world's problems, your feelings are your responsibility, that is theirs. I'm not saying that you don't have to be mindful of someone. I'm not saying you shouldn't, do it in love, but also for me at least, when I was trying to break something that so heavily was stomping me down, I had to hit a point where survival was worth more than the fear. Like getting through this was worth more than staying in the fear that I had been existing in my entire life. And at that point, I realized what I was afraid of was not actually the people, because the reality was I wasn't going to have church members showing up on my doorstep. I'm a grown adult. My dad can't hit me with a belt anymore. My mom, I live 12 hours from my mom. The reality is, once you can get what actual reality is in front of your face, you're going to recognize that you're about to lose a whole lot of stuff. But on the flip side of that, I have gained so much more. So much more. I have deep connections with women and men that I never would have been able to hold space for before. I wouldn't have been able to hold that balance within myself, let alone within another relationship with a friend. But if I had any piece of advice of where to start, it is get acceptance around people not liking you. Find acceptance around people being uncomfortable. But I will also say, it gives every single person that's uncomfortable at that point an opportunity for themselves to grow. And isn't that the whole reason we're awakening? Isn't that the whole reason we're waking up and trying to find ourselves? And I'm not saying I'm doing this for the rest of the world. I'm not. But at the end of the day, every single thing that we do internally for ourselves does have a ripple effect in some form or fashion. Whether it is subconsciously shoving our stuff down, or consciously choosing to uncover it, whether we vocalize that to the world or not, it is going to have a ripple effect. Mm-hmm. So, me, perfect example. I am navigating bringing a new male into, not new, he's been around for about 2 years, but this other male that is not the biological father of my children, into not only parenting my children, which is going very well, but advocating for my children in other spaces, even though he is not the biological father. That is a whole new bridge. What I am finding, and my family, we're all in good terms here, so this is why I will use this. It's making my family and even him a little bit uncomfortable because I'm like, no, that's not a conversation for me to have. You go talk to my mom about that. Or my mom, like, and it's not because I don't want to be involved, but because I realize old me would have taken that on as my responsibility because I birthed those children. But the reality is this male is showing up and wanting to do this with my kids, wanting to do this. So at that point, am I going to just take this on because it's my responsibility because I don't want to make you uncomfortable? Because that's the only thing that's about to change here. That's literally the only thing. Now, I'm not saying that's not difficult. I'm not saying that that's how you should handle every situation in your life. That is not as much of a ruffle for me because I have accepted I'm going to make people uncomfortable. That is my calling in life. Jesus was a disruptor. All of the wild women in all of the histories, they were disruptors. No one around them was comfortable. But the second you for yourself can choose whether you make people uncomfortable, you choose that survival for yourself, and that it doesn't have to stay survival, but you're going to survive for a little bit to get through it so you can actually live. The people that are uncomfortable are either going to grow to the ways that they need to so that they can be in your life, or you're going to recognize that you have outgrown them. And that is also very painful. That is very hard. I have outgrown so many friend circles over and over and over again. But what that is leaving me with is not only just experiences that I can learn from, but it's helping me recognize what I need in other friendships to be able to hold space for me too. Because I'm learning myself too, so it's not fair for me to expect everybody else to be able to meet her and be like, oh yeah, this is great. Like, whatever, sexuality, any of the versions of me that you want to name, if I can't even be comfortable with that version of me, how can I expect anybody else to be? It's going to make them all uncomfortable too. So that, yeah, Leonia, that just wouldn't go away. Get very prepared to make people very uncomfortable.
Yeah, get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
That's what I was going to say. That's what I was waiting to say.
And it's so hard. It's so hard. Our society, like, we are trained to find comfort in every area. Like, whether it's the medicine world, whether it's the food world, like fast food, everything is instant gratification. And way outside of religion, we have been taught to stay comfortable. But even religion is taught in ways that keep people comfortable, you know?
That's fear.
But exactly. That, if you want to call it uncomfortable, that's fine. But at the bottom, if you boil it down, it's fear. And I don't live there. I refuse to live there. That feeds the matrix. The Bible says that's not mine. I ain't taking it. But at that point, it's very scary to walk into the world recognizing how uncomfortable you make people, especially once you do it a couple times. I'm not as scared. I mean, I'm not afraid of people hurting me, but it gets very lonely. It gets very isolating, and it requires an amount of inner trust. But like, it's giving me the opportunity to build this with myself. If I had people showing up to validate me right now, I couldn't build this part of the relationship with me that I need, you know? So I trust that it's just part of the journey, but yeah, it gets real uncomfortable.
Yeah. Courtney, tell us, you were firing there. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Think about that.
My favorite quotes. I live by that quote. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I have gotten wildly good at it. I've gotten so good at being uncomfortable. In fact, I was just talking to my mom the other day about how when fear shows up and when it presents itself to me, I have now gotten to a place where I dive head first, because I know that not only alignment's going to come from that, but I'm facing that fear head on, and I'm taking that power back. For me, like I mentioned earlier on in the episode, is that for me, reclaiming that feminine power isn't about overthrowing the masculine energy. It's not, or that, you know, the masculine in general. It's making room for a better one, I guess. It's about restoring balance. I think many women have spent so many years, sometimes even lifetimes, I know I can speak for that, living in patterns that rewarded constant doing, productivity, logic, pushing through, again, holding it all together. Those are all very masculine traits. And while those qualities absolutely have value and have a place, many of us become disconnected from the equally powerful parts of ourselves, you know, the intuition, creativity, sensuality, emotional wisdom and maturity, receptivity and flow, you know, that ease and flow. It's reclaiming the feminine to me is allowing these parts to rise and be supported again, not replacing the masculine, but co-creating with it. You know, that's that I feel like we don't always have to, the masculine and feminine don't always have to be at war with each other. You can learn to dance in harmony with each other. And that's where all that magic happens. The feminine brings, like, the masculine can offer structure, that productivity again, and direction, grounding. The feminine can bring in like all that aliveness, the connection, the creativity, the softness, being supported. That, and you can, and those, when those come out and can balance each other, that's when all of that real magic really happens. I feel like that's when you see people come alive. That's when you see it's not so unbalanced. But I think there's a misconception too, where we have been, especially us women, where we think like, well, I'm not living in my masculine because I'm a mother. Well, if you really think about it, what do mothers do? We protect our children, we nurture our children, we do all things. Those are masculine qualities. Those are things that we protect them, and it's an innate ability of ours to do that. But when you have that coming from the masculine and allows that space for us feminine to really soften in and be able to be in our soft, creative, and sensual flowing state, then it's a whole new world that opens up, and you don't have to be so rigid and structured and routine and all the things when you're. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah.
And I think that's why a lot of women think, well, I am living in my feminine. No, you're really not. I think that's where we need to really define what the feminine energy is and what the masculine energy is, so that we don't already think, because we think that there's not a lot of work to be done in that sense, because we think that because we're mothers, we are already living in that state, and that's just simply not true. Yeah, I think I can end it there. I could go on for a while, but I think I can end it there.
So I just wanted to point out like a couple of things from both of what you were saying. But first, Courtney, I just wanted to say, I don't know if Jill can see it as well, but it's so interesting to me that your background, the way the sun is sitting, it's literally just light and then dark, exactly half. So it literally for me is a little symbol of the balance of the light and dark, of like the masculine, feminine, or like the yin yang. It's just so amazing how that sort of just came to my attention as you were talking, just as the sun is sitting there. And I think it really does talk to restoring the balance, because that's what you said. You said, these conversations are not about overthrowing the masculine or removing the masculine or going to war with the masculine. It's about creating, you said it beautifully, is creating a better world where we can restore the balance between the two. And I think that's a huge important thing for women going on this journey to realize, is we're not going to war and we're not discarding one or the other. We're just trying to give a bigger space, a better acceptance of the other. And then you said, getting comfortable with the uncomfortable is necessary, because it is so alien to feel and ask these questions when you've been conditioned. It really is a difficult thing. So to get comfortable with that. And then I think everything else that you were saying was just so poignant in understanding what it means. What is my feminine? What is my masculine? What am I doing? Where am I operating from? And whose thoughts are motivating me? Who's in charge right now? Those kinds of questions are really helpful. And then Jill, you said something that I just wanted to highlight for everyone about this process going out there in the world, is that survival is more important than the fear. That was what you said. And I just thought that was so poignant and so impactful, because so many of us stay stuck in situations or thought patterns or even, family units where there is something that will keep you small or keep you hurt or keep you dysfunctional or whatever it might be. And to be brave enough to actually step out of that so that you can survive and that you can then move into thriving one day. I think those are really hard decisions and choices for people, and especially women, to make. So I just wanted to highlight that one.
I also want to say, Eliani, I have had so many people specifically over the years tell me they can't, like, they're just so proud of me, or like, I was so brave to do this. I need to say this. I have not felt 1 ounce of bravery in any of this. So if you are waiting as a woman to feel that moment of bravery as your sign to go, at least for me, it did not show up like that. It literally was like, I have no choice but to change what I have been given. For me, it was my children that fueled that very heavily, and a lot of really crappy life situations. but also, I mean, I appreciate you saying and noting on that bravery, Leonie, but also as someone who's walked through that, and a lot of other women I've talked to, you don't feel brave. You feel
No, no.
terrified and you do it anyways because the fear
Yes.
doesn't actually leave. You just learn to find a place for it at the table so that it's not taking charge all the time, you know?
Mm-hmm.
100%, and I'm reminded of something that the lady who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, there's a line in that story
Emily
where
Gilbert.
that's the one, thank you, where she says the pain of, and I'm mashing it because I don't have word for word, but she says the pain of staying becomes worse than the pain of leaving, or the fear of staying becomes worse than the fear of leaving, something like that. And it's an impossible thing. It's an impossible, frightening, challenging thing, and you will have nervous system distress after making your choice. But wow, as you start to move through it and you get away from whatever it is that has been creating distress for you, and you start following your own voice, it becomes stronger and stronger, and then you get hopefully a better experience. But it's a good thing to point out, you never feel ready and you never feel um courageous. Like you said, it's something that you have to build on, and I think it gets easier with time, but it is a leap of faith that you have to take whether you're religious or not, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then you also said, both of you in different ways, you said that it's important to know that other people's feelings, other people's reactions, emotions are not your responsibility. So what they feel is what they feel, and they must be busy with that. You are busy with what you feel. You are busy with what you need. And that is something that we really have to highlight for our viewers and for ourselves, is that it's not our job to make other people feel comfortable, despite what the world has taught us, that we are here to soothe everybody else, to sort out everybody else, to fix everybody else. It actually isn't. It's our job to fix ourselves, to soothe ourselves, and to take accountability for our emotions and our reactions. And that's a hard one. That's a hard one to
Yep.
swallow, but it's the truth. You're not responsible for what other people may go through. And like you said, sometimes the ripple effect is that someone will look at you doing what you're doing, and maybe the thought comes to them, or maybe the experience comes to them, or maybe you have then the experience to help or share with someone that they can then also make a decision for themselves. And it's not like it's the right way. It's just so wonderful when people start listening to their own needs and listening to their authenticity, listening to their nervous system, getting connected to spirit, however it looks, whatever format that comes in. It's such a wonderful thing. And like you said, it's an awakening, and that's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to get people to become aware, consciously aware of themselves and their effect in the world. So that's just what I wanted to say. And like you said, you sometimes outgrow people, and that's okay, because not everybody has to do what we're doing. But I want to be one of those people who shares, this helped me, this was the experience, this is how I did it, this freed me from this fear or this experience. And I think that's what we're all trying to do.
Actually, Danny, that just reminded me of something I meant to say earlier when I went on my little kick about being uncomfortable there for a second. I forgot about this part. I think one of the things that really would help women too are the women that are finding their voices, like for themselves. Once you have the ability to use it, use it. Because there are women that are trying to wake up or they are in those seasons for themselves and they're looking for someone to connect with. And I'm not just talking about social media. I don't care where you are. It could be a random lady that you're talking to at the grocery store that you just feel like you need to say something to. Like, that sounds woo and weird, but we recognize this in each other as we're waking up. I've had crazy meetings with random people on the street where it's just spirit chance type meeting, but it was needed. And I feel like that is one of the important things too, is not only like the uncomfortableness, yes, going on that journey for yourself, but once you start that journey, recognize the weight in talking about it, because there's a good chance that there's probably 5 women around you that are walking a similar journey. We all just don't know how to talk about it yet,
It becomes that permission slip for others. Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. Talking about it and like we're doing with these conversations, bringing awareness, but outside of these panels and these more formal conversations, just day-to-day awareness and little ripple conversations, like that will help people feel less alone. It will help that woman at the grocery store feel that much more empowered, and wherever she goes that's going to have its own ripple. But I feel like that's really important. Once you find that voice for yourself on whatever level you're able to use it. Now's the time to use it.
That's so true. And I love that you said that, because that is something that has that has happened and that is happening to women is women being silenced, women being spoken over. And I feel this strongly in the professional spaces as well, where it's like, I am a disruptor in that sense because I am very aware of my rights. I'm very aware of my voice, and it's difficult. Sometimes my voice will shake, but I will be that person who will be like, wait a minute, about that thing that you just said, or about that thing that you're just trying to make my problem. I'm not about that. How many women shoulder unnecessary responsibility or like getting the coffee when they're in high executive positions, for example. Like that's one example. It's like there's nothing wrong with getting the coffee. It's not about that. It's not that there's anything demeaning in that thing. It's about recognizing your voice to be able to say, actually, you can get the coffee for us this time because you're not bigger or better than me, and that isn't my role. For example, I'm using a very silly example, but it's being able to use your voice not only for yourself in your quiet, private, spiritual space, but also in the world. And women look at that and they think, gosh, and you as a person, it's so scary to do it the first few times, but then you become more comfortable. And then you meet women that are they've decentered the patriarchy, or they've decentered authority. And it's usually older women, which I think are absolutely fabulous. They don't give a fuck anymore. And they just go out there and they say, this is what I'm doing. And I don't care what you think. And I have such an awe for those women because I think, wow, these are amazing women. And I think they're fab. And I just think that women should have those kinds of experiences and those kinds of examples to look at because, yeah. And I think it happens around this age, your 30s, your 40s, you suddenly realize, hey, that voice does things. It can make change, it can impact someone. And if not anybody else, at least I'm speaking for me.
Yep.
Absolutely. I think once you get to that stage of life, though, there's a whole new layer of things that start to happen, those AKA perimenopause, that sometimes drops those masks for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I just did a whole series and a collaboration with a couple people and other practitioners on that neurodivergence and perimenopause, this intersection of that. And I'll tell you what, and coming from, like, it was 7 episodes and coming from all different angles. And I'll tell you, once you hit that stage, it's a whole new ball game in it. But like you said, it's so important for other people to see you doing that, to see you doing the work, to see you doing all the things. It gives them the permission slip to go inside. And Jill, you mentioned something about social media, and I hooked onto that. I think that social media sometimes portrays empowerment as that instant confidence or that dramatic transformation, but in real life, that reclamation is usually a lot of times a lot quieter than that. It's a lot more layered or human,
It's just a mess. Like,
absolutely. I mean, it comes down to that true reclamation sometimes just looks like setting healthier boundaries, or getting uncomfortable and disappointing some people, leaving spaces that no longer fit you, those circles that will fall away or that you will leave, resting without feeling guilty or having to earn it, saying no when you mean it, not saying yes when you mean no, speaking more truthfully and honestly, authentically, choosing yourself after so many years of self-abandonment, those are the things that reclamation usually whispers to us. And sometimes, honestly, we miss them. We don't grab a hold of them right away until they become so loud that life or those other things get so loud that we have to do those things. It's often it's less about becoming fearless and more about becoming honest with yourself. Some of my own reclamation came through seasons where life forced me to ask who I was underneath the grief, the responsibility, the survival, the holding, the everything. And answers didn't always arrive all at once. It wasn't instant. It came in layers. And I think that it gives the other women or people in general that permission to do the same thing and not have to expect. And I know we live in a society of instant gratification and we are all very impatient, but knowing that it doesn't come all at once. It is a journey. It is a process. It doesn't happen overnight. And I think people just need to know and be okay with the fact that it happens like that.
Yeah. I have a YouTube page. It's called The Ministry Mama, and I started about a year ago. It honestly turned into somewhat of a blog. I've got poetry stuff on there. It's very messy. I've got some stuff that's more like studied out that I'm starting to release now. But and now that things are going a little bit more public for some of my things, I've really thought about putting some privacy on some of that, because I've shared a lot of my story. It's raw, it's processing. But what I am realizing is that exactly like you're talking about, we are taught, or we're being shown, that waking up or reclaiming ourselves should look this pretty confident way. And the reality is it doesn't. And I'm not going to take any of that stuff down. It is all proof of the progress and proof of the process, proof that I can have one perspective and then a year later my perspective can change. And that is okay. That is growth. That is evolution. That's how the human body is actually supposed to work, in a healthy capacity. So, like, reframing that, like, for me, it was allowing it to be messy, and that it didn't have to be pretty, and it took a lot of acceptance that it was
normally it is.
yeah. But like, I thought about this when you were sharing the other day. I have 10-year-old twins, and my boy twin walked in, and I was in the middle of cooking dinner or something, and he wanted to show me something that he had made. And a lot of times I will stop what I'm doing and give my kids, the full attention that they need. But in that moment, I didn't, and he was like, "Mom, can you look at this?" And I was like, "I can't right now, Tucker. Like, I love you, buddy. I'll check on it as soon as I'm done. I'm just in the middle of something." And he didn't get mad. He didn't get upset. He was just like, "Oh, okay, Mom," and like continued moving on. But what I realized in that moment for me as a mother was that I had set enough boundaries with my children that they understood when I needed things or when I couldn't shift my attention. The expectation wasn't just there. And it was really cool to see in my son, because I've worked so hard to be able to express that for myself, but to see my kids being able to like weigh in or respect what I'm saying and not have a meltdown about it says a lot. And it really does. The work works. It takes a while, but it works.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think what you're both saying about the process of this kind of work, reclamation of your conscious power, but just reclamation of yourself, and the healing journeys in general that people have to walk. And like you called it, Jill, the spiritual walks, they are messy, and they're exquisitely tender, because they can be very painful. They can be isolating. They can be lonely. And these are the risks, I think, that come with conscious awakening and moving into, the best possible version of yourself, is that it comes, and I'm telling you guys because I'm an honest person, it comes with loss, because the version that you were before you were enlightened, before you were conscious, before you were healed, was a traumatized version, or was a unconscious version. Maybe not traumatized, but some were, but unconscious. So the decisions you made were coming from a place that was not the whole you, or the full you, or the everything that you could be. And so you feel so obligated and stuck in those positions because those were choices that you made. And you care for the choices and the circles and the people and the scenarios, your job, your family, your friends, your connection, your church, whatever it is. And it's so hard to realize that you might outgrow those things. And it becomes really, really difficult. And sometimes your decisions and choices are so drastically different to the ones that you made when you didn't know who you were, or when you were living under some kind of trauma, or in some kind of conditioning, or some kind of unconsciousness, insecurity, if it's a woman, or anybody. It's not just females who feel insecure, but you made small decisions from a small space because you were afraid, because you were hurt, because you didn't know any better. You had no choice at that time. Now you want to live a life with a new belief system, with, you believe in yourself now, you've healed, you're moving into a different place. You're allowed to make choices from that space. But I can tell you from personal experience, it is horrifyingly painful and horrifyingly difficult to start choosing yourself over and over and over again, despite the ricochet of those old structures and those old situations. And I think you both mentioned that. And it is messy, but I feel like I'm going through it at the moment. I just end up at the place where I have to keep just choosing myself. And I try sometimes to not to move back, and I just can't. I still have to do what feels true to me, because I've learned that the other way is just inauthentic and messier, actually. So I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Absolutely. I think that when you move from a place of inauthentic, is that a word?
Yes,
Authenticity.
yes.
um,
Inauthentic,
that
authenticity.
it does often tend to look messier and more chaotic. And I think that that's why so many people get to a place where they toss their hands up and say, what gives? What do I need to do to move differently? And it's because you need to heal, and like that loss, that grief or whatever, is it breaks you open in a way, and it creates space for you to actually go inward and heal what needs to be healed, so that what you can move with more authenticity. And that's when you find out, looking back, you're like, wow, all this chaos, all this messiness was really because I was moving from a place that didn't feel good to me. It wasn't who I truly was at my core,
Yeah,
and once you get to that place, then you want to move from a more authentic, like, you want to get to know that real you, that core, who you are at your core, without all the labels that have attached to you, or that you've attached to your identity. You want to get to who it is, what you want, and move differently, so that it's not so chaotic, that you can come from a place of ease and flow. I mean, which is, again, that feminine coming up. And but you have to be able to trust yourself. You have to be able to surrender that level of fear and whatever it is that you're moving through, so that you can actually trust yourself to move through those experiences and come out on the other side more safer and more authentic, if you will.
One of the
yeah,
things that I thought about this when we were talking, Courtney. I don't know. It kind of became pick your heart. It's gonna, like, especially once my awareness grew to where I could see the patterns that I'm trying to, like, break down or not continue. When I had those moments of, well, I'm just gonna do what I did before, or just like sit, or I'm just tired, I don't want to do this work. Like, at that point for me, before it was ingrained enough for it to be just like autopilot that this is what we're gonna do, it was like, all right, so it's going to be hard for me to sit here and just ignore all of this and let life continue. It will also be hard for me to do something about it. Like, neither one of these choices in this moment in front of me are going to be easy, but what is the outcome that I want from this? And by asking those questions for myself a lot, I think is what pushed me through. Because for me, there are moments where I was just like, this is easier to just go back to church. It would be easier to just stop and say I was wrong, and there are times where I miss the ignorance. I miss all of the rules, because it was in a lot of senses easier, but it was not. My life was so much more chaotic. There was not actual peace. And until that became something that I learned to exercise and practice more, it was, all right, pick your heart, because neither one of these choices are easy. What are we doing here? And eventually, I mean, I've accepted for myself that I have a season of hard things right now, but I've also been able to enter into the season of recognizing the simpler things because I have chosen hard stuff. So much more of the surface things that used to be chaotic and crazy in my life, is where I now sit with the peace that passes all understanding. I don't have to worry about those things, and the hard things that are hard in my life are very worth it, and I'm not going to not do it just because it's hard. But that line of thinking of, sometimes you are, and it's not always this way, but sometimes you are not given any easy option. Sometimes there is no way for you to, in that moment, make yourself comfortable, even though you need to find some type of comfort. And then all you're left asking yourself is, which hard do you want? Or which outcome do you want? Because it's going to be crappy either way.
Mm-hmm.
It does not stay there, but it stays there a lot. At least it did for me in the beginning stages of waking up. And you got to train that out of yourself to recognize life can be hard and fun at the same time. Life can be hard and peaceful at the same time. It's that duality of the emotions,
yeah.
the balance in
Yes,
the feminine. It's
Yes,
very weird to
yes,
be sitting in panic, but also in peace at the same time at some points. But it's also a whole different kind of awareness to be able to sit there in that and listen to what needs to come through, because it'll be different for everybody.
ding ding.
But when you just let one take over and there's five voices up there that need to be heard, maybe we should have a conversation with the itty bitty shitty committee up there and, like, let them all be heard a little bit so we know who's in charge. But yeah, like that picking your hard thing just really kind of came through while you were talking, Courtney. I think that was for me something that helped me get that bike rolling so I could take the training wheels off a little bit.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I'm just fascinated by everything that we're speaking about, and how, authentic you've both been about your experiences as well. I think it's so valuable for people to be able to hear this, that it is messy, that it is hard, but that there's so much value in choosing that path. And then we are so much more than just one emotion. Like you said, there's a bothness. We hold the experiences, the comfort and the uncomfortable, the hard and the good. But what I do think that this reclaiming your feminine, or reclaiming your womanhood, or your voice, even if you are not necessarily female, if you go through this process of actually connecting to yourself and connecting to something that feels authentic to you, I think the experiences that you have become so much more meaningful, and so much more significant in terms of living a life that is inauthentic, or a life that is supposed to please somebody else, or that follows somebody else's rules, or somebody else's version. It's like, they talk about it in depth psychology, is, you sift through the shadow for the gold, and you find those nuggets of gold, and you're no longer living for pie in the sky moments, promises of a later happiness, or an unreachable dream that keeps disappointing you. You actually have the gold in your hands when you do this kind of work. And this is what I really wanted to bring across with reclaiming the feminine, is that instead of it being shamed, or negated, or suppressed, would like for women to be able to see the gold in being sovereign, in being authentic, in being able to speak for yourself, in being able to trust your body, in being able to listen to your voice, and showing up for yourself, and that you don't have to fit these stereotypes. You can be a full human being first, before fitting into any gender role, or any kind of label. So I'd love to get your thoughts, closing thoughts, on how you feel reclaiming feminine power is worth it, or what it offers. Courtney, do you want to start?
Well, you said something interesting, because you were talking about self-trust. And I think that for a lot of people, in my experience anyway, that intuition is deeply connected to self-trust, that inner voice, that inner knowing, and fully trusting that you can get very far in your own healing journey if you learn to trust that and really connect and grow a relationship with that intuition. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to look perfect or anything like that. But I think many of us growing up, we're taught to seek that authority or that validation from outside of ourselves, when really it's always been inside here. We've been taught to second guess our instincts, and really that's only a place of ego. Really trusting that first thought, or that first feeling that comes to you. That's your intuition. That is, and that real quick second thought, that's usually your ego. And I teach that to my clients as well. But we have been taught to override that feeling, and to stay in our head and logic our way through things. And instead of trusting what our nervous system is really speaking, our nervous system is full of wisdom. And part of healing is learning to distinguish that fear, that conditioning, the protective patterns that we were raised with, from the quieter voice and that inner knowing. I think self-trust is really built by getting, it's not built, right? It's not built by getting every decision right. Like you said, it's a messy process. And most of the time it is a very messy process. So it's built by listening to yourself, honoring what you hear, honoring yourself through the whole process, and learning that you can hold yourself through all of the outcomes, all of them. I think that's just an important thing to space to hold there. I think that we're kind of moving beyond different, or how should I say this? Moving beyond narrow definitions of feminine power. Like, feminine power isn't just one personality. It's not one aesthetic or one role. It's for me anyways, feminine power is rooted in that authenticity, that discernment, that self-respect, self-trust, self-choice, the agency, the autonomy, all of those things. That's what feminine power to me really is. And reclaiming that isn't about becoming someone new. It's about coming home to parts of ourselves that were never truly gone in the first place. They were only buried deep beneath all this conditioning and survival that we were raised with. And when we allow those parts of us to rise, not in opposition to the masculine, again, we want to balance, but in partnership with it, we create something more whole and way more valuable, more honest, more aligned, and maybe more deeply ourselves. That's where our authenticity really lies.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. That's amazing. You said so many valid things there. And it's true. Where parts of ourselves rise, we get back to the authenticity. And Jill, what did you want to weigh in for us? The benefit of connecting to the feminine and authenticity.
I went here last Sunday and I was trying to not go here again, but I can't help it. Okay, so parts. Liana, you've heard me use this, but I gotta say it again. So all of the things, like, while I do not think that you have to read a Bible or be spiritual in any sense to live a fulfilled life, that is a very big part of my journey. So I don't want people to listen to me share and think I'm trying to just harp on this. This is just how I relate it and the importance of it. And it's very ironic that I'm about to use a bunch of men to explain this femininity thing, but like, this is where we're at. So, you know, Courtney was talking about finding space for those parts, and I've done lots of parts work myself, and like finding acceptance for those. When you look at Jesus and the 12 disciples, think about the 12 disciples like they are different parts of humanity, right? You've got like doubting Thomas, you've got Judas Iscariot, who betrays Jesus and in the end commits suicide, but that's how his story ends. Peter is the most impulsive person probably in the whole New Testament. No impulse control. But Jesus, I see that walk and that embodiment as just a way to complete the self. And instead of Jesus negating any of those sides, he puts a seat for them at the table and says, "You're welcome here." And when you and I know that there are lots of women that I'm sure that have embodied this, but from my perspective, when you are able to walk into that and accept all of those parts of yourself, look at your different parts and say, I see the side of me that wants to quit right now. I see the side that wants to lie and steal and get everything I want. I see the side that wants to just take charge because it's so excited. The second you recognize that those are all parts, but not your higher self, you're able to sit there and be like, oh, okay, so these are all parts of me and I can use them all to the benefit. Like it's like a well-oiled machine now. And I use the Bible to paraphrase because it is a lot of people will like look at that as a hinge point. But for me, Jesus was the perfectly embodied person that I have personally followed. You know, I'm sure that there are other people that did it, but he didn't do it by negating that feminine side of himself. He lived in a male meat suit and was one of the most feminine spiritual leaders of their time. You know, it's why he was such a disruptor. But when we as women especially are able to not only find that wholeness within ourselves, but the power that is with that, not just the wholeness, but like the power that comes with being whole, whether you're male or female. The males have had a run with it for a while. Like, us women, like, this could change the world. You know, it could genuinely, you put a bunch of women in charge that are comfortable being themselves. It's not because we don't want men being in charge. We need them to build. We need them to co-create alongside of us, you know, and have that balance. And for me, it is so, whether you relate it back to the Bible, whether you relate it to just conversation that you're having and the importance of the feminine rising, however you look at it, there are so many different ways to see the whole self as being so much more powerful. And so whether you're waking up in small little increments or it's all one big giant landslide that hits you and you're integrating for a year and a half and all of a sudden you're this whole different, whatever stages you're in, it's all a part of that accepting of the whole self, you know? And I feel like that is it is the most important thing that you have to do, whether you're male or female, to be able to incorporate that feminine side. Like, if you can't get comfortable with those feelings that make you uncomfortable of your own, you're going to stay at war with yourself in that area, you know? It's not going to shift out of that. And it's not a doomsday thing, but those are things that restrict you. They restrict your walk. They restrict your capability to help other people, if that's what you're feeling called to do, or just show up in the world or exist happily. You can't do that without being happy with the other parts of yourself, or at least content with them, or not letting them fight with each other on the inside. And I mean, we could talk all day about the things women specifically could do that would be different, or this, that, the other. But the reality is, like Courtney, we've all touched on it. If you can't accept those parts,
Mm-hmm.
nobody else can either, and you stay at war with yourself. Like that just.
Yep.
So I really was trying not to bring that 12 disciples thing back.
But it's a great analogy. I love that. I love that perspective.
It really, like, if so many people take Jesus's journey so literal.
Read between the lines.
Yeah, but for me, I have found so many aspects in which to read between the lines. Last week we started talking about the Lord's Supper, and this, I mean, it's relative. Jesus talks about breaking the body and drinking of the blood. The body is the meat suit is the only thing that made him male. So while yes, in some perspectives it's male's blood that was acceptable, but women's isn't. Jesus' blood was female. It came from his mother. Like it came, and when you look at, he says, "This is my body, which is broken for you. Take, eat." You're breaking those parts apart. You're deconstructing those masculine emotions. You're leaning into the feminine flow. You're drinking the cup when he references that. But both of those are outside of the self. Those are your meat suit, because you're feeding your soul. That's what you're feeding. But you got to have both sides. And I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about the Bible like that ever before. But also for me, it just revalidates and reiterates the importance of us finding the sake of the whole self, because there is that much importance to it, and we've missed it for so long.
Yeah. What you're both saying is so important and so valuable. And I just want to thank you so much for your insights, your opinions, sharing your experiences. I think this has been such a rich episode. And I just wanted to reflect on a couple of things that came up, is that, reclaiming your power is not like a single thing. It's a series of choices, conscious choices to return to yourself again and again. It can be a messy experience, but we've spoken about questioning inherited beliefs. We've spoken about honoring our body, our nervous system, and our intuition, to stop apologizing for our needs, to recognize our needs, to soften when we've hardened for survival, to speak where we used to stay silent, and to trust ourselves enough to live truthfully. And I think perhaps the most radical thing that we spoke about is to allow ourselves, instead of being defined by a world that has a stereotypical version of a woman, is to actually define ourselves, to define herself. And I just really wanted to say thank you so much. Both of your rich tapestry of experience and knowledge has been so insightful and helpful. And to our viewers, thank you for watching us. And if this episode has resonated for you, I'd love for you to share it, reflect on it, and continue the conversation with us in the comments. And thank you, ladies. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. And if there's anything that you'd like to share as we're about to close off, you're more than welcome to.
Well, thanks for having me. This has been a really valuable and like you said, rich conversation, and I loved every minute of it. And Jill, I'd love to connect with you.
Yeah, definitely. I would connect as well. And I appreciate the importance that critical mass has taken on of this awareness and educating the public about things like this. It's so important. And I'm grateful to get to be a part of the work. All these conversations deepen the work for me, deepen my awareness as an individual, and getting to know that also helps other people in the collective, even if it's just one person that watches this. It's inspiring. It's the ripple effect. It's the butterfly effect. And I'm so grateful I get to be a part of it. So thanks for having me.
Thank you.
It's amazing. Both you ladies are awesome. And we'll post your information in the blurb that goes up on our video when it does go out for the viewers to see, so they'll be able to reach out to you as well. And just thank you so much for being with us, and we can't wait to see you in our next quarter when we move on to a new, spicy, interesting, exciting topic where we are disrupting the consciousness and bringing awareness to everybody else. And thank you for joining us. And we